This is a sad moment for a number of reasons. My mother was murdered in her home in 1993 by a drug addict. I only say that to segue into what I'm going to now say about 20 children who were murdered at a school. Was it day before yesterday, Mark? Day before yesterday, and 5 teachers. I think we should take note of that. And I would like everyone to stand for 1 minute of silence, please. Thank you very much. Gun violence in the United States has reached a level that's intolerable, and something must be done about it. It's literally a country at war with itself. Too many people have died as a result of gun violence. On an average, 25,000 people a year die of gunshot wounds, and those people, that 25,000 plus another 60,000 or so are wounded. So almost 100,000 people are either die or are wounded in gun-related incidents. We have to also address those questions. And while you're having your dinner and while you're listening to the discourse here between Ambassador Schneider and David Soul, we should think about that and think about what we can do together to address this issue. Thank you. Mark?
Thank you very much, Darnell, for having taken that moment to make us all, I think, realize all that we have to be grateful for. The fact that we're here in Berlin, in a city that has also seen so much violence and so much division, that we're here together in peace, and such a wonderful occasion to see really a diverse group of individuals, every corner of the world, here for the right reasons, for also the right goals. So I think there we definitely should give thanks that we have the opportunity to be here this evening. What I'd like to do now, ladies and gentlemen, is to introduce a woman who's been very important in the development of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, also a close family friend. I have to be careful where I stand, Darnell. I'm causing interference, I think, with the microphones, but are we okay? Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Cynthia Schneider, I met initially when she called me. We were actually doing a conference, one of our first conferences in the United States at Columbia University, and I still remember she called me up and was explaining, Mr. Donfried, I heard about your conference, I'd love to come as a participant. And the more we got talking, I said, wait a minute, I don't want you as a participant, I want you as a speaker. Ambassador Cynthia Schneider, most of her life was a tenured professor of art history at Georgetown University until a friend of hers called her into active duty, and President Clinton asked her to serve as ambassador of the United States to the Netherlands. And that was, I think, the first time really where you were hands-on in terms of actually practicing cultural diplomacy. And I think that really lit a fire in Cynthia. Since her time serving as ambassador, she's, I know, the most active voice of cultural diplomacy in the United States. Really a rare mixture of somebody who understands cultural diplomacy in terms of the theory, but also the practice. And so I'm really happy to have you here. She's a member of the advisory board of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, has been very helpful for the developments not only of my own thinking in terms of the field of cultural diplomacy, but really the Institute as a whole. And she just came actually from Cairo, so there are a number of interesting stories I'm looking forward to hearing later this evening, but we'll have another opportunity to discuss that. So I'd actually ask Cynthia Schneider if you could maybe say a few words of introduction about Mr. Soul, and then we have the interactive discussion. But first, please join me in a very, very warm welcome for Ambassador Cynthia Schneider, who will be moderating the session. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. It is great. It's always great to be back at the ICD, and you always have the most amazing people here who I'm so excited to meet. And I always say, but how did you do that? How did you get these people? And you always say, well, I just asked. And I applaud you and the whole team for that, because you do just ask and people come. So congratulations to you for coming back, David Soul, to what I understand is basically almost like a second home to you. You have several second homes, I think, and we'll talk about all of them. But maybe let's just begin I'll give a brief introduction of who you are, but then I want to go back to the beginning of why Berlin is a special place to you, and then we'll go back through. But as many of you probably know, David Soul is renowned as a musician and as an actor, both in television and in film in the United States, but I think elsewhere too. We know him particularly as Hutch of the famous Starsky and Hutch, really is the seminal detective television show, which now has spawned so many programs. It's certainly the most popular genre in the world. But this was the seminal one, and now young people know it too. It received the ultimate tribute, which is imitation in the form of flattery, in a recent film done in 2004 with Owen Wilson and Ben Stiller doing their own retake on Starsky and Hutch. So everyone, I have to ask you how you feel about that, but everyone is very familiar with this now. But of course, you've gone on to do many other films also involving many other countries, and we'll talk about that. But why don't you begin by telling us something about what Berlin means to you?
You know, it would be a lot easier if we had two microphones here. Can we get is another one coming? Good, because she may want to interrupt me, you know. Oh, you can speak loud enough. Go ahead. Okay.
I won't be intimidated.
Also, ich bin hier in Berlin aufgewachsen. Als ich Jahre jünger war, von 6 Jahren alt bis 12. Und wir haben in Berlin-Dahlem gewohnt.
Most of the people do not speak German.
It's tough. I'm too bad. Sorry. No. I just said why it's special to me is because I'm not going to speak very long in German. Because I grew up from age 6 until 12 here in Germany. My family came in 2 weeks after the airlift in 49, and we were here until 56. My father worked with the refugees and the Flüchtlinge aus dem Osten, out of the East, fleeing into Berlin. It was the real Casablanca, you know, people coming into Berlin to exit to the West. His job was just twofold. One is a kind of undercover information man, and he would report to the U.S. Commission. And secondly, he worked with the Lutherische Feldbund, the Lutheran World Federation, which was a refugee relief organization that worked with both churches and with people to put families back together, and to also administer aid and help in a place called Marienfelde here in Berlin. And we lived in Berlin-Dahlem. So in one sense, ich bin ein richtiger Berliner. You know, it's very special. Also,
So,
that's two.
yeah, it's going to be working in a minute.
Oh, it's not working yet.
It will be in a minute. So welcome back to Berlin. You heard from my own background that I was trained as an art historian, wrote books on Rembrandt, and now all I want to do is to go to protests in Cairo. So I also believe that life can take, strange paths and happen in unpredictable ways. And you, as I understand it, didn't exactly start out to be a television actor. Why don't you give us a sense, because I think it'll be inspiring to a lot of the interns and the young people here, of how life can lead you in very interesting paths as long as you're receptive to it. You have to be receptive. So give us a sense of how you ended up eventually as Hutch.
Oh my goodness, what was that? This is a kind of a long story, but I'm going to try to keep it simple and to the point. My dream was to follow in my father's footsteps, as it is for a lot of young people who have that opportunity. Some people don't. But mine was. I wanted to teach history, political science, and I wanted to go into foreign service. That's what my father did. But I was also gifted as a sports player. I played baseball, and I had a contract with the Chicago White Sox to pitch.
Really impressive. That is really impressive.
And but I decided I decided to go to University of the Americas, Universidad de las Americas, in Mexico City, and to the University of Mexico to study Latin American social political history instead. What a choice.
Academics over sports. It's okay.
And so I went down following my dad, who was teaching junior diplomats in Mexico at the Colegio Americano there. Now, first thing I had to do was learn Spanish. So my brother and I went to an institute, Spanish institute in Mexico City, in an area called the Pink District. No relation to prostitution or anything, just a Pink District. And there was a series of a lot of cafes and art galleries and things like that. And there was one there called the Toulouse-Lautrec. And the Toulouse-Lautrec was run by an Egyptian who had been run out of Nasser's 1956, run out of Egypt, and had come to Mexico City and set up this art gallery and coffee house. Now, my brother and I happened to be there downstairs one Thursday night, and there was a table full of young men over there, and they were arguing and talking loud and making, passionate, talk. And that was kind of upsetting in a way, but not really. I just sort of watched it happen, listened to it. And eventually, we had over a couple of beers, my brother and I. Eventually, they stopped talking and pulled out their guitars and started singing Mexican folk songs. This was just incredible. Well, a couple of weeks went by, and we ended up coming to this place. I asked Alex, who ran the place, what are they doing down here? Well, these are the students from the University of Mexico. Some of them, many of them professional students, because they're trying to get what's a better word than undermine, I suppose. They were overthrow. Probably. They were rebels, wanting to overthrow the government policies there in Mexico that allowed imperialist countries like, gee whiz, guess what, like the United States, from coming in and controlling their subsoil rights and so forth and so forth and so forth. And who were we? We were a couple of blonde Yanks sitting over in the corner. I said, wow. Well, one night we came down there and they had their meeting. They were strategizing, their strategy meeting. And afterwards they pulled out the guitars and started to sing. And because we'd been sitting there for 2 or 3 weeks and appreciating their music, they went, come. We came over and we sat down at the table with these guys. And they pulled out and they started to play the music for us. And it was heaven. It was amazing. And week after week went by. We must have been there for 7 or 8 weeks. And eventually, one week, they brought me a guitar. And they gave me my first guitar. And with it taught me the rhythms and many of the folk songs of Mexico. And with that, I hitchhiked back to Minneapolis, Minnesota, right in the middle of summer, not having...
That's a long way to hitchhike.
I know, but that's where up through what they said was bandit country in northern Mexico. It wasn't drug time, and it was bandit country. It was Zapata country, Emilio. And up through that area. And it was middle of summer, and there weren't many jobs for people, so I chanced this, and I went into a coffee shop called the 10 O'Clock Scholar, which had just sent Bob Dylan off to New York. And I auditioned for the people there as the only blonde, blue-eyed Norwegian who could sing a Mexican folk song. And I was hired. It was great. So I sang things like, qué bonitos ojos tienes, debajo de las dos cejas, debajo de las dos cejas, qué bonitos ojos tienes, and cielito lindo, and stuff like that. Los árboles, los, oh man, I mean, there's a whole slew of them, a whole bunch of them. Anyway, I started to build my repertoire, and eventually I got married. Actually came back to be with my girlfriend at the time, And I had to get married. We all did when you get pregnant then. And there was no option. There was no option, and we didn't want to take the option anyway because we were good Lutherans. So we got married, and of course I was much too young, and it dissolved. Marriage dissolved, and all I thought about was escaping. And the way to escape was my music. That's what I was going to do, was take the music. And I sent off a tape off to Los Angeles. Was a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of his. Was a secretary to the A&R man in Capitol Records. And he sent it back saying, decent voice, but the material stinks. So I said, what am I going to do? Well, one night I'm sitting up in my manager's, or the booking agent's room, his office, and we're talking, my guitar friend and I are talking. I said, I just want to do music, and I want to remain anonymous. I don't want to be seen for what I look like. And if I know what I'll do. Well, let's go down and get a mask. And I cut a mask with 2 eyes and a mouth, took pictures of it, sent the same tape that it sent to the West Coast, now to the William Morris Agency. And in 2 weeks, I got contracts back in all fields. Come to New York. So this crazy idea of wearing a mask sold these guys for some reason. And for the first 4 months that I was in New York, no one saw what I looked like. I didn't take it off. I simply said, my name is David Soul, and I want to be known for my music. That was it. And I wore the mask. Yes, I took the mask off with a different name, and nobody cared. I put the mask on, and boy, was there attention. The curiosity killed the cat, and that's the way it worked. And eventually, I tried to open live in a club in the village, and unfortunately, the only sound that I heard that night that made any sense was the sound of wooden chairs scraping across a wooden floor as people got up and left. You can't hold an audience for 50 minutes with a mask on your face. And you realize you have to give yourself. You have to give yourself to people. When you perform, when you are in service, public service, you have to risk yourself. And that's the only way you can do it. So the mask came off, the telephone stopped, and the decisions had to be made. Do I stay or do I go? Do I stay and not sure that I'll make it or not? I had to stay. And I was seen on the Merv Griffin show without the mask, and a lady from Columbia Pictures heard the story of what happened, and she had seen me on that show before with the mask on. And she said, anyone who's crazy enough to do something like that has got to be an actor. So she called me up, and I went in and auditioned for her in a play by Christopher Isherwood called I Am a Camera, which was the basis for Cabaret. And it was about this town. And I did this scene, and they signed me to a contract at Columbia Pictures, Screen Gems Television. And I bought a white sport coat and went to the West Coast. And then for 6 years, I was under contract to the studio, the last of the star system that they had out there. And then started the whole, that's the beginning. That's the beginning. And then it wasn't until 1974 or 75, this is 1966, 67. It wasn't until 74 the Starsky and Hutch started.
Well, that's a really inspiring story. Actually, I would take great comfort from the fact that it really required a human connection. That's a good message for cultural diplomacy, that you can't really perform and connect with an audience without that personal give and take. They've got to have a sense of who you are, and maybe have a sense of your vulnerability in front of them to really build that kind of connection.
You probably know more than anyone, or as much as anyone would, how important trust finally is, and way of the beginning for that process to go, to build the trust, and is from exposing who you are.
And you can't do that without being able to see the other person in some way, which has some interesting implications for some parts of the world. But I think that's true. So I have to just ask you a little bit then about Starsky and Hutch, and was that just a little bit? We don't do it for long because then we're going to talk about Cuba. But was it fun? Did you enjoy it? Was the character? How did the character evolve? Was it your character? Did you have input into it? And did you have a good rapport? I know your Starsky eventually had enough and wanted to leave. Were you ready to keep going? So what was it like? Was it fun?
Of course, it was fun. It was work.
Yeah.
I never. I have no illusions about work. I got to work. It was the best job I could get at the time. I think there was a part of me that had become kind of a theater purist. I was not meant for television. I should be in the theater. That kind of youthful thinking. But television was there. I didn't realize. It took me a long time to realize how powerful television really is, and it can be used for really, really good, and it can be used in a really devastating kind of controlling kind of way. And I hope that show. I know it meant a lot to a lot of people, particularly in the 40s, the 50s now, who watched that show, because they remember that it's a show that their parents would let them stay up and watch. It's one of the few. I think, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. Had a lot of input into the show, particularly after the first year. But we didn't get out to see what the reaction was in that first year because we were working 14, 16 hours a day in the studio or, out on location. So when there was a break and we finally got out and met the public and so forth, it was just, wow. And I wasn't prepared for that. Wasn't.
And what do you? And that is an excellent point. I don't mean to say, oh, gee, making television, that's fun. I know my friends who work in the field. It's just when they're shooting, just forget it. You can't. They're just gone. They might as well be in Antarctica because it's just 24/7 undertaking. But what do you think it was that people liked so much about the program? The camaraderie between the two of you, the sort of good guys getting bad guys. What part of it do you think?
I think they like
most
the car
appealing?
most.
The cars. I forgot about. I am such not a car person. I totally forgot about.
No,
the cars.
I think
Yeah,
the
of course,
key to the
cars.
longevity of it was obviously the relationship between the two of us,
Yeah.
and we found a tempo rhythm together, and trust is what we found together, and so it wasn't ever a one-upsmanship. It wasn't like trying to outdo the guy, Yeah, we just bounced off each other, and we'd improvise a lot of our dialogue. As long as we told the story, we could do what we wanted. So finally, they trusted us to do that. It took a while. Today, that wouldn't happen. Today you have, we had one producer. We had an executive producer and we had a line producer.
Wow.
Today, you have
10,
two
yeah.
executive or three executive
More.
producers and 10 line producers. And it's like a meeting every time you want to change a word in the script. And it's just, wow, forget about it. So we had a lot of freedom to do what we felt was good. And the work was good. We worked, we took some really terrible scripts and made them somehow work. But that's our job.
Well, yeah, but it's, then as now, I think it's really great acting that carries any television show. We were talking earlier about Homeland, which is the show in the United States that everyone is watching, including the president. And I know from that show, one of the originators, Howard Gordon, is a friend of mine, and they do have like a gazillion producers in addition to him, but they also do allow the chemistry of the actors to happen.
Yeah.
And that does, they do improvise, things do happen organically. But then I have to ask you this question, and then we'll go on to more cultural diplomacy things. So what do you think of the Ben Stiller, Owen Wilson version?
That movie, I thought it sucked.
I kind of thought you were going to say that.
Even a word, it was terrible. It was terrible. It was terrible. It was not Starsky and Hutch at all.
Did you ever talk to them about it? Did they
No,
consult
they
you
just
at
paid
all?
me a lot of money to appear. But if you dropped your
Yeah.
keys, you dropped your keys on the floor during our scene. They reached down to find them on the floor, and got up, and got back up again. You'd have missed our appearance on the screen. They had to do it just because if they didn't, it would not have a credibility. They had to show Paul and me, so they paid us. We got paid. I'll tell you.
Well, they obviously didn't pay you to be quiet about the movie, though, so good. Glad
That was the
you-
only reason I did it.
Well, it seems kind of inevitable, but so then after that, you did go to the stage in London,
Yeah.
and acted for a decade or so, or longer.
Well, I've
Quite
been
a-
now living. Well, I did I've done 6 television series. I mean, so after Starsky and Hutch, I've done several more series, and a lot of different movies and stuff like that. And finally, just got fed up with Los Angeles. I lived there 27 years, and it just didn't serve the spirit. It didn't serve the soul.
No, I don't think it makes that claim. No.
Well, it doesn't, and it just doesn't. And it more and more, it became a town of who you know and what was your last picture.
Yeah.
And I had to get out, and I had an offer to go do a play in New Zealand, which I took, and I took the Blood Brothers there, and then took Blood Brothers to Australia, and then got an invitation to go to Paris, and went there and did several films in France. And then theater called in England, and I'd always wanted to go and do theater in England, and so I went there. And I've been on the stage quite a bit. Met my lovely wife there, Helen. Helen?
Helen is
She's
here.
right there.
Hi.
Stand up,
Well,
honey, please.
talk,
Come on. She won't stand up. She won't.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about the different dynamic between doing film and television and acting on the stage.
For me, there's not much difference. I think the key to acting is the key to, I think, for the little I know about, quote, cultural diplomacy, the key to acting is listening. You've got to listen to the other person, and that's how you make the connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first connection. And then is what happened with Paul and I and Starsky and Hutch. Slowly you begin to build the trust between each other. And certainly that's the way a story develops. It can develop the other way too. And that's and then you have your fights and your battles and your, misunderstandings, which we need for drama. So, but listening starts. And we have to do that as much on film as you do on stage, I believe. Now, some people tell you differently, but that's where I begin.
No, that's very interesting. I heard an interview with Sally Field, who plays Mrs. Lincoln in the acclaimed new movie Lincoln. And she was saying that, and the interviewer said, well, I understand that Daniel Day-Lewis stays in character, he plays Lincoln, throughout the whole film. Was that hard for you? And she said, no, because of course I stayed in character too. I always do that. And she described how Steven Spielberg created for them this almost sort of insulated environment with like no sound around them. And she said he would crawl up to her occasionally, literally crawl up and whisper something in her ear and then crawl away again and leave them on this set so they could really be there. And she said at the end of the filming of the movie, she was talking to one of her children, and the daughter said, oh, thank goodness I don't have to talk to that woman anymore. So I think she really had been, in the skin of that character.
There's another wonderful story which just comes out of nowhere. I got to tell you about Dustin Hoffman and Sir Laurence Olivier. And this was in a film called The Marathon Man. And there was a scene there where I think Laurence Olivier played this doctor and was going to pull his teeth out. And Dustin Hoffman, being the kind of man who stays in character and gets really in there, he went off and didn't sleep for like 3 days, and he didn't eat, and he was in growth, and just so he could be that character. the time. And he's just, while he's pulling his teeth out. And Sir Laurence Olivier walked up to him and finally said, "Oh, dear boy," he said, "try acting. It's so much easier."
I love it. Oh, that's great.
I think that's great, isn't it? You don't have to crawl up to somebody to give them, sorry. No. You do your job, you go home, that's what you do. Oh God, what a boring life.
Yeah, no, we kind of like to romanticize it, those of us who aren't actually doing it. But now we're going to switch away from the stage to real life. I would love to hear from you 2 examples of your own personal. You may say you don't know what cultural diplomacy is, but you've given me already many examples of your actually doing it. And I loved the story of your on set in Morocco and how you kind of took things into your own hands. It really shows the value of just people to people, talking to people. So you wanted to play tennis.
Yeah, they wanted to play tennis. Well, I got to set it up. I was doing a film there, Italian and Spanish, French, God knows what else, co-production, called The Secret of the Sahara. And we were getting paid a lot of money, and we also getting per diem, a lot of per diem. There's no place to spend it out in Erfoud, in the middle of it, near Rashidia and what is that? There's no place to spend it, really. And they hadn't had rain there for approximately seven years. It was very, very dry. And anyway, I normally when I go to do a film, I don't just do the film. I kind of mix with the local people, town, see what's going on. And I also, in this particular case, I spent time at the hammam, and I met this guy who happened to be the mayor of the town, and and so forth, and we just chit-chat and talk. I didn't talk very much English. I didn't speak very much Arabic, but we managed to get on. And then I wanted to play some tennis. I had some time off, so I went over to this tennis sport club, and it was a mess. It looked like the road, terrible road work. It was some big gouges in it and puddles from I don't know from where, broken main or something. It was awful. And I thought to myself, I've got all this money. What am I going to do with it? I thought, well, shoot, maybe we could fix up this tennis club here. And I mentioned this to the mayor, and he said, "Oh yes, we have a contract company. We can do that." And I said, "Yeah, okay," but found out that most of the workmen, because there had been no rain, hadn't been working for a long time. So there was a real need for employment in the community. Not a big community, but a community nonetheless. And so I said, I'll tell you what, I'd rather not give it to the company. I'll put it out for bids, all right? And they can bid. But I'm going to, put it out for bid, and I'd prefer to find another way to do it. Well, sure enough, they got together a team of people who had not worked in that city or that town for a long time. And their bid was an appropriate bid, but it was under. And I gave them the job and the money to fix this thing. And they did a brilliant job. And when it was finished, the town celebrated. It was only a town can celebrate. And they gave me a big tea service about that tall. And it was wonderful. And what had happened really was a film company comes into your town to take over your community. And instead of taking it over, you become part of the community. And they acknowledge that. And there's it's a small story, but in a way, it's not. It's kind of emblematic of a larger kind of, I don't know, we could, I suppose, apply that to a lot of larger scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, imagine, for example, if after having invaded Iraq, Americans had actually listened to what Iraqis imagined for their country and saw as possible for their country. There's
you see that as a role for cultural diplomacy?
I think that personally, I don't think there's a real difference between diplomacy and cultural diplomacy. We make that difference, but I don't think it really exists. And I do think today, to be effective in diplomacy, you have to rely on soft power, the power of interacting between people and listening to what people are thinking, instead of hard power, military power. We've tried that. Look how effective that has been. But unfortunately, most countries still make the distinction. And as we heard this afternoon, kind of put cultural diplomacy on the side as a kind of nice thing you do when you've done everything else. But, imagine if in Baghdad, one of the first things we had done was to restore the movie theater and the actual theater, and had given funding to the young filmmakers, to the young actors and theater producers, and they would have started building the vision for their country, and they would have connected it to their illustrious past instead of having it be this just rupture. I have a young Afghan friend who's a filmmaker who wrote this much more beautifully than I can ever express it. He wrote to me and he said, our history is like a mirror, and we need to be able to look into that mirror and see ourselves in order to be able to go forward. And in that mirror is our music, our film, our literature. But our mirror in Afghanistan is broken into so many pieces. And we need people to help us put those pieces together so we can see ourselves. So I think that actually is diplomacy, although we insist on saying, no, it's men in suits around a table signing treaties.
Right.
That was last century. But I'd like to take you to one more place and then let people ask you questions. I'm sure people have questions. I'd like to take you to one more place, which is Cuba. Mm-hmm. And I understand that you got UK citizenship just so that you could go to Cuba more easily. And what is it that you find so interesting in Cuba?
Well, it wasn't exactly, that's not exactly the reason, but it's a nice way of putting it. Cuba's already been a dream of mine since I read The Old Man and the Sea many, many years ago, and Hemingway, of course, was a literary hero. And unfortunately, as we all know, the barricade, the blockade, the embargo didn't allow Yanks to go there, which really pissed me off and really made me angry. After spending a number of years in England, I was able to get, first of all, get residency, and then got a UK passport. And the first place I wanted to go was Cuba. And my wife Helen and I went there. I was invited. I managed to go as an invitee to give Eliares Ochoa, the youngest member of the Buena Vista Club, social club, an award for his contribution to world music at the Karl Marx Theater in Havana. And if that isn't a strange irony of me, a Yank, going down there to give him an award in the Karl Marx Theater, it's sort of, well, anyway, it was, and that started the beginning of a love affair. Now, you may not know, but Hemingway lived in Havana for 22 years before he died. And they have a museum there which is lovingly kept very much as Hemingway left it. And I made a visit in one of my subsequent visits to Havana, to Cuba, because we've gone back several times now. And I went out to the museum and went through it. And the director took me from room to room and said, well, this is where he did this, and this is where he did this, and this is where they slept, and this is the blah, 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 blah. And this is the dining room. And up on the wall there was a painting by Jean Miro called The Farm. This was Hemingway's favorite painting. When he died, his wife, Mary Welsh, gave the painting to the gallery, National Gallery in Washington. And the wall has been vacant since that time, many years ago. And there's still a stain there where the picture was. Anyway, and I said, oh, that's interesting. And I went back to London, and I thought about it for a while, and picked up the phone and called the National Gallery, now being a British citizen, yeah? And I said, listen, here's the deal. And I kind of explained it. And I said, is there any chance that I can get a hold of a 35 millimeter slide of Jean Mireau's The Farm? Oh, yeah. The guy said, sure. I said, how much? Oh, I think it'd be a lot. Oh, $50. I said, could you send it to me, please? And he sent it, and it came in the mail. And my wife, who works in marketing, has several printers she works with, and took it to a printer and put it on to shoot it onto canvas. Got the thing back from the printer, rolled it up, gave it to the Cuban ambassador, who happened to be a friend, Cuban ambassador to the UK, who was on his way back to Cuba. He put it in a tube, brought it back to Cuba, gave it to the Ministry of Culture. The Ministry of Culture gave it to the museum. They framed it, and today it's on the wall. And it was just it was such a, like, yes, it really felt good. Well, we were there just this past September on a holiday, and we always pay our respects to Ada Rosa and Gladys, our favorite Cuban ladies. And I went out there, and they were always happy to see us. I went out there. Well, we went out there, and in the middle of our conversation, she said, "David, we have a problem. Hemingway's 1955 Chrysler New Yorker Deluxe convertible has just come into our hands, and we want to restore it to its original condition by June 20th, 2013 for the International Hemingway Colloquium happening here in Havana. But we cannot get the parts. We have many people who have wanted to help in the States, but as you know, we can't get the parts through. They say we can't go any farther. The big fines, huge fines. So we need help. Would you help us?" I knew why they'd ask, because I was able to get that picture. I knew it. And I said, I don't know anything about reconstructing or restoring an automobile. So I said, well, sure, I'll do it. And got back to London, not with a clue as to what to do. Managed to look up online and found a car parts dealership, a car parts magazine, sorry. He called this guy, told him the story, and he flipped and decided to put this story in 10 consecutive issues. We called a guy and he also raised 8,000 pounds to buy the parts, ship them to the UK, and then we'll ship them from the UK to Cuba. So that's what we're doing now. And when I leave, I just got back on Monday from Cuba. And when we go out of here tomorrow, I'm going to go to Boston to meet the guy who's giving the parts and film him. And then they're going to be shipped to UK, and then we'll get down to Cuba and meet them down there. And we will start this process. It's really quite extraordinary. The doors that have opened simply with the willingness to do this has just been incredible. People have given themselves their services without asking for anything in return. And it's amazing the kind of talent that has been put together to make this happen. So we are hoping to have a finished car by 20th of June. And all things being equal, there's no reason we shouldn't. I should report to you next year that we've done it.
Well, I have no doubt that you are going to succeed, and I think your musical career may be slightly in advance, but I would say that you are definitely a one-man cultural diplomacy band. So really, thank you so much. I don't know, Riemann, can I let people ask some questions, Riemann or Mark? If people have questions, I think, would you be willing to take a few questions?
Yeah, of course.
David?
Okay. Absolutely.
I think why don't you ask your question, and I'll repeat it on the microphone. Oh, do you have a mic? Okay.
Let's see how long the cable is.
Or he can ask it and I'll repeat it. We could do that. Okay. Go ahead. Vous dites en français?
Oui.
Vous faites en français, je traduis.
Ok. Non, je voudrais d'abord féliciter David pour toute. Je voudrais d'abord féliciter David pour cette carrière planétaire. Je dis planétaire parce que nous l'avons connu à travers plusieurs vies. Alors, je me dis, David, le 28 août 2013, c'est votre anniversaire, mais c'est aussi quelques années quand même. Qu'est-ce que vous aimeriez qu'on retienne de vous à cet âge-là? L'acteur, le comédien, le musicien, l'homme du peuple ou l'homme qui passe?
Let me just translate that. First of all, he's
Voilà, je suis
congratulating.
Philippe Sawadogo, l'ambassadeur de la francophonie auprès des Nations Unies, mais j'ai été directeur du Festival panafricain du cinéma de Ouagadougou, ambassadeur à
fantastic.
Paris 11 ans, et maintenant je suis aux Nations Unies. Voilà.
Oh, fantastic. I didn't really. Congratulations on your film festival. We have a question from the former director of the film festival in Ouagadougou, which is a famous Pan-African film festival, which really, given what's going on now in West Africa, is more important than ever. And so he's, first of all, congratulating David on his very distinguished planetary, global career, and obviously had a very, very strong impact, and asking how you would best like to be remembered, David, as a musician, as an actor, as a stage actor, a film actor, a man of the people. How would you most like to be remembered?
I don't know that I have any particular desire. I think probably not less as an actor, singer, although I am grateful for the opportunity to do that and to entertain people, if that's been the case. I think mostly I'm just crazy about finding ways of communication, of communicating with people, listening to them, listening to their stories, sharing in their lives if possible. I have moved so many places around the planet and have met so many different kinds of people and different nationalities and races and religions and everything else. And this is the kind of communication that I love. And I think as a communicator, I would probably rather be remembered, if anything.
I have a feeling you are going to be remembered as a global communicator for sure. Thank you. Merci pour votre question. Do we have any other questions?
I think everybody wants to eat.
It is possible. Darnell, okay.
Yes, I'm not 50, I'm 65, and I used to...
I'm 69.
I used to watch the program too, of course. One thing that I noticed, one phenomena that occurred in a suburb of Detroit, where I live with my parents, was the fact that the Inkster Police Department, they had a vehicle strangely resembling the car that you and Starsky rode in. Now, was there a moment in your life where you saw the impact of your characters? What's this guy, Huggy Bear and Starsky and Hutch, where that was kind of like emulated, in society itself?
I think that it was police chief, police captain in Cleveland, I believe, was the first black police officer, and it was modeled somewhat. The influence came from, I think, from Captain Doby on Starsky and Hutch. It was very important, that relationship that we had with Doby. It was not a, how shall I say, it was not especially race conscious. He was the boss. He was the chief. And you could talk behind his back, because we did a lot. But at the same time, what he said goes, and it was very important. And it was important for Bernie Hamilton as well. We had these, that the role that he had was not based on I am the first black police captain, that kind of thing. It was that I am a police captain. And the other side of the coin was the street, was Huggy Bear, and that wonderful term that came out of it, the word on the street, man, the word on the street.
That came from that?
That came from Starsky and Hutch. The word on the street, man. What is it? And that was Huggy Bear. And he represented a whole other culture, black culture. And the two of them, police captain and Huggy Bear, did not get on very well. But he for us became our conduit. And so there was a respect for what he gave us. If we had a problem, maybe it was a bit Deus Ex Machina, but if we had a problem, we went to Huggy Bear. He'd sort it out for us.
Just to follow up,
Yeah.
you did, for want of a better term, you did a film with a Cold War theme. Could you
World War III.
expound on that a little bit?
World War III. I think they're probably tired of hearing all this stuff. It was World War III.
Nobody's tired of hearing him talk about his experiences, are they?
World War III was with Rock Hudson and Jeroen Krabbe, and that was based on I know what it was. It was on wheat, wasn't it? Based on wheat. There was starvation happening in the Soviet Union at the time, and the United States was withholding its reserves, and we reached a detente. What do you call it when you?
Detente.
Not a detente. No, not a detente. Came to a precipice. We came to
reached a...
we came to an impasse.
Thank you.
Something like that. Not unlike what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it was either you supply the food for us or we will attack you. And they came in through Alaska. And there was just a squad of two squads, very small squad, and also the Russians who were coming across the Bering Sea. And it became potentially a world conflagration, that little event up there. It was a 3-hour film, and it was a very well done film. It was done. I happened to be on the early shoots of that film when the director stepped out of his helicopter and turned the wrong way and walked into the tail prop.
Oh my
Killed him. Just gone, just that fast.
Oh my God.
It was terrible, really terrible.
Oh.
That was real.
Wow.
Yeah, it was up on Mount Hood.
Wow. Oh, how terrible.
Yeah.
How terrible. Well,
Anyway,
there is...
that's enough.
There's no... Well, we have one...
You hadn't asked the question, you wouldn't have to hear that.
Terrible story. Well, I think do we have one more? Okay. Mike, yeah. But I think as you're going there's no question that narratives in television influence life. I mean, the Cosby Show's the classic example, Will and Grace for same-sex couples. This has an influence, no question about it. And the Turkish soap operas on women in the Gulf countries. So it has an impact.
So I would just like to comment the story about mask. Thank you, Mr. Sol, for sharing this very intimate story. So I was thinking about this place and cultural diplomacy as Ms. Cynthia Schneider before analyzed as there is no difference between diplomacy, cultural diplomacy. What we actually learn here is to use different cultures and identities as a performance of self, so we can protect ourselves using other symbols, owning this kind of base of life. And I think it's the greatest benefit to understand the culture in that way, because it's not a mask which which is cheating. We don't protect, we just use a different way. And we allowed to ourselves to share this. It's not monopolized for one. And this is the kind of plurality which I recognized in your story, which is in another direction, but it's the same way. We can also use another symbols and differences to protect one piece of our identity and to be more than one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have other questions or comments? Well, I know we have.
Go ahead.
Rosie. Okay, then do we have any? Well, you have to. Well, or else.
Final
okay,
question.
and I think we'll make this the last question because I think.
So first of all, I wanted to make a note that as growing up in Israel in the 70s.
All right. I was there several times.
Yes, we were very popular, and all the country looked at
I loved it there.
watched you. So first of all, I wanted to make a comment that America did it through you. You know, the cultural diplomacy, the use of film and TV and music, and as cultural diplomacy, really made it for the U.S. The Israeli really grew up after looking at the U.S. as a model for that. So this is first of all, so for you to know, like all the country watched and waited for the Starsky and Hutch. But this is one aspect of cultural diplomacy. I mean, the role of the celebs or the TV or the film as cultural diplomacy, the influence actually to bring your culture also, and to influence through this media on people and make this connection. But because we are feeling very close, the Israeli, to the US through all this culture. We are really patriotic. But there is another way of using your status and using the fact that everyone knows you and are influenced by you and going after you in order to raise awareness to subjects across the world, you know, to issues, crises, and so on. So, sorry for not making this, maybe this research. I was wondering if you had the chance also to influence in this way, meaning using your status and the fact that you are so famous in this time to get involved in political issues or in some crisis, human relief or so on, especially in view of the fact that you were interested first in political science and so on, and after your father.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not. This may sound strange, but I'm not interested particularly. I am finally interested, but not interested for me to become involved in politically. I would much rather get to know people, who they are. It will come out, you know. All the stuff comes out. Why are you using this particular medium? Why are you using film? Why are you using television? America has one of the best propaganda systems in the world, in television and film, and it says America is the dream. It's not true. America has many problems, and those are the issues that I'm interested in. But they have a great propaganda system. Yes, I'm part of it. But I can also see the difference between how to use television right, in a good way, and how it's used in a way that I don't appreciate, personally. Now, do I want to bring my name, associate my name with every action? If you ask me, yes, I'll tell you. But I would much rather be involved with people as I have described. I became involved in Pittsburgh back in 1982. During the shutdown of the steel industry, and they put 250,000 people out of work. And my brother was a pastor who was defrocked for behavior unbecoming a pastor, and in America put into jail because he stood up on behalf of those people and would not leave his church. He would not change his. And the police came in, broke into his church, and arrested him. That's America. Hey! You know, and that's, for me, that is a real double standard. It's like this thing about the blockade. The embargo makes me livid, makes me really angry. Ernest Hemingway, literary legend of America, baseball, the number one sport in Cuba and the number one sport in America. American cars, 1 out of every 6 on the road. Music influenced both ways. Cuba to America, America to Cuba. All these wonderful human kind of things. And you guys can't get your act together? You think there's a threat? What are you talking about? The only problem that Cuba has now, the real problem, is its infrastructure. It does not have the infrastructure to handle suddenly pulling up the embargo. But little by little, it must allow that to open little by little with the help of the United States. It needs to support that country. And it's gone far enough now. It's pointless. And I want to deal with issues like that. And that's what I hope that this story of Hemingway and the restructuring, the rebuilding, the restoring of his car can become symbolic. And in that way, tell the story of my feeling about the embargo.
Thank you so much. I think you are really a living example of everything this institute is trying to do. So thank you so much.
No, my
It's
pleasure.
really been an honor to talk with you. Thank you so much.